I'll put that speaker on if that's any better. Good. My name's Councillor White, John White. I'm the chairman this evening. And on my left, I have acting vice chairman, Councillor Andy Baker. The other councillors who are members of this committee are sitting on the two side tables. They're the ones who ultimately will debate and vote on each of the applications in front of us tonight. On my immediate left and right, I have TDC officers, including the head of planning and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee, and it's important that the councillors can hear all of the presentations and the debate. Therefore, I respectfully ask that you do remain quiet and don't interrupt them. Now, this is rather a special announcement. As members will be fully aware, this planning committee is held in what we call the pre-election period. It's acceptable for business, as usual, to be dealt with at the meetings of the council, and in this case, determining planning applications to which the statutory headlines apply. However, all members would have received the formal guidance issued by our Chief Executive in relation to the use of council resources being prohibited for political purposes during this sensitive period. The use of resources includes a meeting of the Planning Committee, and therefore the members of the Planning Committee and those councillors who wish to speak on items must remember of this and be mindful of the guidance that we have been issued. It's in a period which always intrigues me as why it's called PERDA, but it is called PERDA, so if anybody else has heard it. Right, we move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Point of clarification.
Right, yes,
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit concerned by the statement you've just made, in that it may in some way prevent people from saying exactly what it is they want to say because of the PERDA situation. That does concern me. Political statements I know are not allowed, and I try very hard not to make them, as I think everybody else does. Everybody this side of the table, however, will not necessarily fully understand what constitutes a political statement. As such, I think there is a risk that their evidence may be affected in a way that might make it incomplete or even inaccurate. And I think it's going to make it quite difficult for the committee to make decisions based on that. Therefore, Chairman, would it not be more sensible to defer the entire meeting until as soon as possible after the local elections? Thank you.
That would mean... I take Councillor Bray's point. It is a fine point, but I think we've got a published agenda, and I think we would stick to it rather than defer it, the items tonight, as we've got everybody here as well. And I will just take the opinions of anybody else. The solicitor has advised me that we should go ahead, and just ask people to be careful on when they're speaking. Right, apologies of absence and substitutions, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Heaney, with Councillor Val Guglielmi as her substitute. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And now we turn to the minutes of the last meeting. That is the 12th of March 2019. There were an A and B part of these. Do I have any? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Chairman, I move them en bloc.
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you. Right. So it is so moved, and I'll take a vote on it. Is everybody in favour of doing that? Right. Thank you very much. Councillor Guglielmi has rightly declared she wasn't at that meeting, so that's granted, in which case we move to declarations of interests. Yes, Councillor.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I will be on item 5. I am predetermined, so I shall leave the room. All right, and I won't sit here for the discussion.
Right. Councillor Everett.
Yes, I'd like to declare an interest on 10 and 11, A6 and A7. I'm the elected member for the first, and I am standing for election in the area of the second. I don't, however, believe that I'm predetermined on either of those, so I will remain in the meeting.
Right. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Guglielmi.
I had better declare an interest because it just depends what happens at the election on to number 6, on item number 6. I shan't be going out because I'm not predetermined, but...
Right. Thank you very much. No other declarations? No? Okay. Questions to the Chairman on item 4 under the procedure 37. I have received none of those. So we move straight into agenda item number 5 and ask for Suzanne, who will advise us on this one.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This application seeks a reserved matters consent for the erection of 32 dwellings in relation to appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. Details of access have previously been approved following the appeal decision to grant the outline consent. Members will be aware of this site as it was deferred by Planning Committee on the 12th of February in order for a legal opinion to be sought in respect of the need for a habitat regulation assessment and the impact that would have on the recreational disturbance avoidance mitigation strategy known as RAMS and the contribution requested by Natural England. So this is the proposed block plan. The layout, scale, appearance and landscaping of the proposal has not been amended in any way since members previously considered the application. The legal advice received advises that there is an ongoing duty on the local planning authority to consider whether a habitat regulation assessment is necessary. In this case, no specific habitat regulation assessment was carried out in relation to the outline consent, and it was not specifically clear what the inspector took into consideration in terms of the appeal. So, as a result, it was concluded that it was necessary for a habitat regulation assessment to be carried out. So, following that advice, the local planning authority undertook a habitat regulation assessment that suggested that the impact of recreational disturbance could be mitigated and secured by condition. A general response on this approach was received by Natural England, raising concerns, and further legal advice has been sought which supports that the financial contribution requested can be sought. Therefore, the HRA has been amended and the applicant has agreed that they are willing to pay such a contribution. And it's considered that this contribution is sufficient to mitigate against any adverse impact that the proposal may have on the European designated sites. Natural England have confirmed that they do not wish to be reconsulted on the application because it's under their scope of 100 dwellings, but have confirmed that providing the financial contribution is sought, that they have no objection to the proposal. So as a result of this advice, the recommendation has been amended to include a financial contribution towards the RAMS and is as the same as previously recommended. I do have the design of the houses if members feel necessary, but they do remain unchanged from what was previously considered.
Thank you very much. And as it was a deferred item, we've got no public speaking on this particular one. The highlighted bits in your agenda, 1, 3, 2, 5, I think as the officers have dealt with those. Any further thoughts? I think, Councillor Everett, you were the person who set us on the trail of the items which are now covered. Have you any further thoughts? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm really pleased that the legal advice confirms the need to do this, and hope that this will result in contributions to RAMS throughout this authority, actually, because most of this authority's land are covered by these regulations. So I'm very pleased to see that, and hope that we will be able to usefully contribute to the RAMS strategy.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers? No signs of further speakers. Do I then have a proposal? Somebody willing?
Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. As far as I recall, the only reason that we deferred this matter was to get the legal advice about the contribution. I think everything else we were quite happy with. So I propose that we go with the officer's recommendation of approval.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Hones as being the first one to get the seconding in. No speakers? Right, in that case I put it straight to the vote. Those in favour, please show. And those against? One abstention?
Yeah, I'm abstaining because I wasn't there on that meeting.
No, that's understood. Right, okay. Thank you. So that is, at long last, now approved. All settled. Right. Now we move to agenda item 6. This is land east of New Road, Mistley. It's planning application 18/01767, and this is an outline application. And Mr. North is going to introduce it.
Chairman, thank you. As you just noted, this is a variation to an original planning permission approved on appeal last year. Basically, before us tonight is the revised layout plan. That's what, in effect, has been applied for, and that's what members should give their attention to. This is the application site. Again, you will have visited the site on your site visits this morning. So you'll be familiar with the site itself. You have Green Lane, which is an unmetalled track to the south of the site. You'll note where the site access is proposed. This is straight onto New Road, between two large detached dwellings. There's a smaller minor road called the Park at this point here. And again, I think the park is denoted by a mix of mainly terrace-style properties. Again, you'll have noted from the site visit the area, or the majority of the area, adjoins open countryside. This gives a better aerial view of the site. I think highlights the number of perhaps mature trees and other planting within the area. Again, you'll have been aware of the mature hedge along Green Lane and also along the north-east boundary. I have a few photographs of the site itself. So this is looking across an existing entrance from Green Lane. The site is relatively flat, but as you'll note, is open, but is enclosed by mature planting and hedging. So this again is looking along the boundary with Green Lane. And then a few more photographs of the site. So that's looking across the site back towards Green Lane. And again further to the southeast. That's the eastern boundary. And then looking back towards the Green Lane to the left, and the large dwellings located immediately to the west of the site. So this was the originally approved layout, approved on appeal. I think probably the key difference between the original approved scheme and the scheme before us tonight is the size of the green, if you like, buffer strip between Green Lane and the edge of the proposed built development. I think the other thing to note is perhaps the nature of the proposed dwellings. As you'll see from the approved layout, there's a significant number of terraced-style properties. It looks very urban in form, if you like, and perhaps isn't best suited to this semi-rural location. So I think officers have been keen to work with the new applicant to perhaps improve this layout and result in hopefully a better development. So this is what is now before us tonight. So it's the revised layout. The access stays exactly as approved previously. But the key difference is the reduction in the green, if you like, the green belt between Green Lane and the edge of the development. As it notes within your report, at the narrowest point, it's approximately 9 metres from the proposed dwelling and Green Lane, and extending up to the east side of the development. At this point here, that's about 50 metres between Green Lane and that point. So it does extend as you move further to the east, which I think is more, appropriate in this situation. The existing hedging to both the northeast and the southern boundary along Green Lane would be retained, as would other boundary treatments to the northwest. You'll note the distinct change in the form of the buildings now being proposed. There's a significant increase in detached properties, semi-detached properties, with just a small number of terrace buildings located in this location here. And to the northeast of the site is a proposed two apartment blocks consisting of 6 units each, both at ground floor and at first floor level. So that's the key change, really, is the reduction in the open space. Although, again, as you'll note in your report, it's still, in terms of the area, is way above the required policy level. Our policy normally requires 10% of the site to be open space, and this is way in excess of that. So I think in terms of the layout, it's certainly an improvement on the originally approved scheme. The applicant has deliberately put these apartments along this stretch here, again in a terrace form, which again, to a certain extent, is to mimic the terrace properties further along, although clearly, as you'll see in a minute, they're slightly more bulky than perhaps what you'd find further to the northeast. That's the existing layout as approved, onto New Road. Then this is the indicative scheme that's been put forward as part for the apartment blocks. As I mentioned, you've basically got 3 units at ground floor level, 3 units at first floor level. The applicant has sought to, if you take sort of local styles within the design, so you've got plain-tiled roofs with hips, you've got weatherboarding or stained timber boarding to the other floors, then render to the lower level. Bear in mind, this is indicative only. The detailed designs will have to come before us again at a later stage when the other reserved matters are dealt with. So, Chairman, that's what's now proposed and before us. I think it is, in summary, certainly an improvement on the originally approved layout, but as mentioned, it does result in a smaller buffer to the southern boundary. But the recommendation, Chairman, is to approve this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have some speaking on this particular item. We have a member of the public speaking against the application. Mr. Vogt, if he is with us. Right, yes, sir, if you care to come down and get yourself established at the table and get the microphone switched on, and then you have 3 minutes to address us.
Okay, thank you, Chairman and members of the Planning Committee, for giving me the opportunity to speak against this planning application. I do so to give a voice to local residents who have asked me to speak on their behalf. Clearly, the applicant has outlined permission, which has won appeal on fine margins. The applicant is now trying to alter the scheme for the worse. Please now allow me to set out how the Council could and should refuse this proposal. Green buffers. The proposed scheme will provide about 3,000 square metres less open space than the approved layout, equivalent to about half a football pitch. Whilst the scheme provides more than the 10% minimum provision normally sought by the Council, this is not a normal site, as it is outside of the Mistley settlement boundary and inside a conservation area. Again, such a large amount of open space and green buffering was essential at appeal. The proposal also encroaches closer to Green Lane, with 2 pinch points closer than the approved layout. It also introduces new flats and pushes them right up to the public footpath at the park. Introducing gable roofs here will further overpower this public right-of-way and its quaint rural character. I'm also worried about the officer's report. Amongst the various objections, including 89 from local residents, the last line of the Council's landscaping officer's objection has been missed off the report. It should finish by stating, regardless of the changes to the internal layout of the development, the reduction in the width of the open space on the southern boundary is unacceptable. Whilst this omission is probably an innocent mistake, it doesn't give the committee the correct information on which to base its decision. Bad design. There are a number of examples of bad design, as follows. New houses were now back on to Green Lane and the park. This will be ugly and certainly out of character with the conservation area. Gardens to plot 39 and 44 are now about 20% below the Council's minimum standards. Also, several properties will fall a long way short of the 25-metre back-to-back and 15-metre back-to-side minimum separation distances set out in the Essex Design Guide. These characteristics are not surprising, given that the design is substituted in large detached homes where once there were smaller terraced homes. Policy requires good design. Why should we accept anything less, particularly on sensitive sites like this one? This clearly shows that the applicant is watering down the design from the narrowly won appeal. Indeed, to continue the analogy, trying to pour quart into a pint pot. It is well within your remit to refuse this scheme. Grounds for refusal could focus on extra erosion of countryside and conservation area character and bad design by way of poor outlook, privacy and visual amenity. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Now, we don't have anybody from the parish or town council, so now the ward councillor, Councillor Cully.
Thank you, Chairman. Committee members, I ask you to reject this application. You're all aware that the original application to build dwellings at this location was refused by this committee. The planning inspector allowed the appeal with the specified original layout. The developer now seeks your approval to significantly amend that site layout approved by the inspector. Part of the application heading reads to provide a reworked layout to provide wider roads to improve emergency access. Are we ready to believe that the planning inspector approved a site layout which actually restricts access to emergency vehicles? The application goes on to say, and to incorporate a mix of housing types including detached dwellings, semi-detached properties and apartments. The approved layout indicates predominantly terraced housing contained within the site itself. So the developer wishes wider roads, detached houses and flats. Well, even developers can't make land grow, so the inevitable consequence is that the amended plans, if approved, will reduce open space and move dwellings nearer to Green Lane and the footpath from the park. Additionally, we are told in the application that the developer wishes to provide slightly bigger gardens to the dwellings. Well, I suppose it follows that larger houses require larger gardens. What if the developer has a genuine desire to improve access to the site by providing wider roads and to give more private amenity space? There is a simple solution. Make the space available by building fewer dwellings on the site and not by building so close to extremely sensitive areas in our conservation area that the buildings will be dominant and obtrusive. This application is described as land east of New Road, but effectively the development will only be accessed from New Road through the curtilage of an existing property. The impact will fall on Green Lane and the park. If allowed, this application will contribute to the urbanisation of those areas. This area is firmly in the Mistley Conservation Area and is particularly sensitive, being currently a rural idyll walked and enjoyed daily by local residents. The other speaker has detailed the percentage loss of open space should this application be approved. The report from the Council's Tree and Landscape Officer is very significant, and I will quote it in full. It is considered that the proposed changes to the approved layout will be more harmful to the local environment than the development proposed on the site approved at appeal. The primary reason for the increased harm to local landscape character is the reduction of the width and overall size of the open space on the southern boundary of the application site. Whilst the existing hedgerow on the southern boundary is shown as retained, the reduction of the width of the adjacent open space will limit the degree to which new soft landscaping can be carried out to screen the development. Without a substantial screening belt on its southern boundary, the development will be clearly visible from the heavily used public right-of-way along Green Lane and from the other viewpoints along the public right-of-way network to the south. The concluding paragraph, which is not recorded in your agenda, says regardless of the changes of the internal layout of the development, the reduction in the width of the open space on the southern boundary is unacceptable. The application includes provision for some affordable housing, the majority of which is euphemistically described as maisonette apartments. In local language, we call them flats. One type of housing not required in Mistley is more flats. But of course, flats take up less space, especially when they're dumped alongside the rural footpath from the park and no private gardens are provided. These flats will be entirely obtrusive, entirely out of keeping, the wrong type of homes in the wrong place, and with no guarantee they would ever be specifically available to local people. If these flats were built in the proposed location, the tranquil walk along the rural footpath from the park would be overseen by intrusive gable ends, rural nature destroyed. And finally, 2 points. The revised site layout appears to provide additional access routes from the site into Green Lane. This is inappropriate and further infringes upon the rural nature of Green Lane and the conservation area. The original approved plan shows an attenuation pond. The revised plan shows no facility. Presumably it takes up too much room. There is considerable doubt the surface water drainage can be processed by ground absorption alone. Members, this revised plan should be rejected. It's not in keeping with the rural nature of this conservation area and seeks to encroach upon it for the purpose of building larger houses to maximise profit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. And now we have the agent, Rebecca Rogers, if she's available. Yes, good, thank you. Right, good evening. You've set the microphone, so you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Rebecca Rogers, Planning Associate at PRP, and we are the agents for the application, and I'm speaking in support of the proposal. The application in front of you this evening has been a result of significant pre-application discussions with your officers and has been through diligent determination period with several extensions of time to allow consideration of further points. The applicant is currently in the process of acquiring the site and is looking to bring forward much-needed housing. It is worth highlighting that Carla have had no previous involvement in the appeal that was allowed in February 2018. Upon reviewing the approved layout, it was clear that a number of issues need to be addressed. This includes the lack of forward visibility on a road due to the positioning of a dwelling, insufficient space within the site to manoeuvre large refuse vehicles within the turning heads, as agreed with Essex County Council, failure to comply with the Essex Design Guide in relation to garden sizes, back-to-back distances and parking courts, as well as limited visibility for vehicles exiting the parking court. To address these issues, the applicant has proposed a more logical form to the layout. The visibility issues have been removed through providing wider roads and complete removal of the parking courts, which have been replaced by on-plot parking. The proposals include policy-compliant garden sizes and adequate distances between properties, allowing for improved privacy levels and outlook. In this context, the nearest point of the development to Green Lane is 9 metres, with the widest point being 50 metres, which provides sufficient depth to maintain a landscape buffer and the semi-rural character in this location. The proposals well exceed Policy Com 6 requirements of 10% open space by providing 27.6% open space within the site. A range of detached, semi-terraced and apartment-style buildings are proposed for the site, which the detailed design will come through the reserve matters stage. To address comments received by members of the public, an illustrative sketch has been provided to demonstrate how those proposed apartments will be of an appropriate form, scale and massing, so to complement the character and appearance of the conservation area. We note that the application has been called into committee, and I would draw your attention to the conclusions within the committee report, which addresses these concerns. No objections have been raised with regards to highways, ecology, trees and landscape. With this in mind, I urge you to follow the recommendation of your planning officers this evening and vote in favour of the application before you now. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Right. Don't know whether Mr. Norris has got anything to add or any questions to raise.
Chairman, I think it's important that we refer members to the final line of the Landscape Officer's comments. So apologies, that was inadvertently left off the committee report, but I'll read the final line out. Regardless of the changes to the internal layout of the development, the reduction in width of the open space on the southern boundary is unacceptable. So that's the opinion of the Landscape Officer. So
right, that's it. Thank you very much. Councillors, now is your chance for your say. We all visited the site this morning, rather blowy in that particular area, I seem to remember. Who's going to start the ball rolling? Yes, Councillor Guglielmi.
Well, I have to agree with the landscape officer. The thing that concerns me is the park, the apartments looking out onto the park road. There is nothing there at all. As I am a local councillor, and I would have refused the application in the first place, but we didn't get a chance to do that, I just can't see that it's got enough buffer there at all to, for the walkway that's down there. And as everybody visited the site today, they can see it's really totally out of keeping with the area. Large detached houses, and then we have an estate. Really is without, and looking at that now and seeing the site, it really is without not keeping the area at all, not within keeping.
Right, thank you. Yes, Councillor Everett.
Thank you. My first observation really is that the landscape officer very, very rarely makes any comment on any application before us, and particularly not of this nature. So when he does make a comment like this, it does have incredible weight. And I hope that the committee will take that into account when they make their deliberations. I'd also like to make another observation, which is it's not usually my wont to defend planning inspectors, but planning inspectors have a lot of experience in dealing with applications, controversial applications, and often go against what we perhaps might normally think. But in this particular case, I think their justification was actually quite sound, and to move away from what the planning inspector has said again seems perhaps a little bit illogical in the present circumstances.
Thank you very much. Further speakers? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one question, one observation. The question is, could you let me know how many houses? I know the initial application was for 67 houses. Has that number been reduced? And the second point is, I know they've talked about the entrance to the estate for emergency vehicles, and we have proper roads at the beginning of the estate with pavements. But as you get further into the estate, we have houses with their entrances at the front, and it looks to me as though there are shared surfaces. And this committee, while I've been on it, has been quite concerned about shared surfaces and frontages of houses close to shared surfaces for safety reasons. And also we would have emergency services and refuse vehicles going along these shared surfaces close to the fronts of houses. So could you confirm whether that's the case, please? Thank you.
Chairman, yes, it is still 67 houses, so that's still the number. And yes, there are shared services the further you go into the site. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yes, Councillor Baker.
I have issues with this, and I hope that my colleagues are happy that they've got an A3 sort of the first one and an A3 picture of the second one, so the proposed and the approved, so they can see what the difference is. Apartments, regardless of what they look like, there aren't any apartments or flats, as far as I'm aware, in New Road. This committee refused an application for 8 flats further down New Road because of the effect they would have on the conservation area. With regard to, is it that picture that's up? Yeah. On this picture, just if you go left with the cursor, keep going, keep going. What is that there? It looks like some sort of building to me. I just want to know what that is meant to be, because that looks
that's a substation.
So how close is that to the boundary? And can you confirm, Councillor Coley mentioned about suds, can you just confirm that that's in the bottom right hand corner? I believe that's where it's meant to be, on the eastern edge, please. Thank you.
Chairman, yeah, we think it's a small substation which will be about 5 metres from the boundary of the site, and yes, the suds are located to the eastern side of the open space.
So not the suds, the substation. Right, so it's there. That's it there. Yeah.
Yes, I must say that I query that. The original approval, it was right to the west of the site, and now are you telling me it's now much reduced physically in size and it's now adjacent to the substation? Or is it still on the western side? Get my orientation right. On this map going north, it's on the eastern side, and it was on the eastern side, but in a slightly different position. Yeah, I'm within that. That was the Original,
It was
yeah.
on the east side.
Yes. Now, in the suggested site, it's now gone missing, has it?
No, it's here.
Oh, it is still there. Had just been, okay, right, okay.
So there, it's right in the far corner.
Oh, right, okay.
Can you just go back to the original approved? Because there doesn't appear to be anything close to the boundary with Green Lane, and the buffer was a lot bigger. And now in the proposed, we've now got what you think might be some sort of substation that is 5 metres from Green Lane.
Just down here, yeah.
Which will have, well, it can be screened as best you can, but it's still going to be very, very close to Green Lane.
Right, further speakers while we're trying to work that out? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at both the approved by the inspectorate and proposed, I have to say that I do concur with Councillor Everett. I think the inspector has made a decision, and I would naturally have to go along with that. But I am having great difficulties with the layout as we see it now. I'm concerned about the element of the trees that seem to be so removed from the proposed, which are evident at the approved. I'd like some more information about that. Are there TPOs on those particular trees there, and where do they sit within that, and why they're not shown on the approved? As I say, I'm really having great difficulties with what's before us now on the proposed, as I don't think it will benefit the local infrastructure or serve any great purpose when you already have an excellent original proposal before us.
Chairman, just to confirm, it's the whole site's within the conservation area. Therefore, the trees will be automatically protected, subject to being removed via planning permission. So the existing trees are protected. Obviously, tonight we're looking at just the layout. There will be a further submission of landscape details, and issues concerning the loss of trees will be dealt with at that point. Clearly, there would be some trees lost from the originally approved scheme to what is now being. There'd certainly be less trees within that southern part of the site, but they are protected at present by conservation, by being part of the conservation area.
Right. Further speakers? Yes, Councillor McWilliams?
Yes, just very quickly, Chairman. I mean, obviously there are an awful lot of conditions being put here in place as well, which are covering certain areas of whatever's going on here. But in general, I did prefer the approved site because the buffer was that much bigger, but I didn't quite like the indicative layout, whereas I liked this here, except obviously the flats, although I know they've tried to make it look like houses. I'm still not sure on that. I just can't make my mind up on it. It's the design. And I know and I appreciate what councillors opposite have been saying. The inspector has approved this, but we need to make sure that we get what is right for the area, and that's where I'm coming from at the moment, and I'm just trying to get my mind around it. But there's just one or two things that I feel if we could just that buffer could change. I'm looking also, and I think the comment was made by Councillor Carley about the access to New Road, other accesses to New Road. I can see the one that was originally approved, but I'm not sure if there were any more anywhere.
Green Lane, it's not
Yes, at that one at Green Lane, sorry, not New Road. But he did mention that there were more accesses have been made on the new one. If you could just highlight them for me, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Chairman, it's my understanding that there would only be one access serving the site, yeah, which will be here.
footpaths, I do beg.
Certainly, as part of this scheme, Chairman, there is a footpath which is shown as running through the open space and which terminates where the cursor is just here. So it does come into where the existing access point is at Green Lane. Yeah.
One at the other end as well.
Yeah. And there's one at the far end as well.
Yes, Councillor Baker?
Thank you. Obviously, normally we just get outline applications for the principle of development, and sort of the approved plans aren't normally part of that. I'm just wondering what the inspector actually said about how far, or his comments were with regard to the buffer at the bottom, because obviously he's made a decision that it doesn't have an effect on the conservation area, I'm presuming, too much, but the fact he's actually approved a plan with a big buffer would indicate that, to me, that he was concerned about the effect of closeness to Green Lane and the surrounding sort of agricultural part and the views across to the listed building at Mistley Hall in Acorn Village. So I just wonder what his reasoning was for actually approving a layout when it's not normally, well, I say not normally, we don't normally get it when we have outline applications.
Yeah, Chairman, I don't have obviously the appeal decision with me tonight, but certainly, from what I can recall, part of the benefits of the scheme were the fact there was a larger buffer there. So certainly that was in that appeal decision, I believe.
Councillor Benson.
Councillor Benson, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just picked up on page 33, Essex Highways Department, item 2, which says that all footways should be provided at no less than 2 metres in width. So on the shared surfaces area, they wouldn't be able to comply with that.
Yeah, that's another point. Is there anything else? And we'll take, and then I'll ask Mr. Norse on his views on that. No, nothing further at the present moment. So, if you would mind.
Yeah, certainly, Chairman, in terms of shared surfaces, you wouldn't necessarily have a 2 metre wide strip actually delineating a footpath. That's why it's called a shared surface. But certainly the remainder, where there are footpaths, they would have to be 2 metres in width, definitely.
Right. Further points? No. Councillor Brown? No. Right, you've ironed this out. You know what the officers are recommending, and you know also what one of the other officers is also recommending refusal. So, do I have a proposal one way or t'other, please? Councillor Baker. Yes.
I would prefer us refusing on as it stands at the moment, as the application stands at the moment.
Right. Do I have a seconder for that? I do. Councillor Alexander. Now,
You have some reasons.
yes, I shall take any further thoughts on it. I think the officers might have found the appeal, have they? Whether they wish to add anything at that stage.
Chair, just for clarification, the inspector doesn't refer specifically to the proposed layout, but he does say, he talks about limited views from Green Lane and the footpath, and says, given the density and maturity of the boundary hedges, the opportunities to retain and reinforce the boundaries, and the proposed setback from the southern boundary, the minor to moderate adverse effect in terms of visual impact would be mitigated. So he does make a reference to the setback helping to mitigate.
And if I got it right, then that was the original proposal, he said, but it now looks as if it's, the suggestion is that that setback space has been reduced.
Yeah, so you could infer from that the inspector might think that be less acceptable to reduce that. Although he does then say in medium to long distance views, the effect on the landscape character and visual impact would be significantly diminished and the overall effects would be negligible. So.
Right.
What weighting did he give that? Sorry.
At the very end, in the planning balance, he says the proposal would result in a minor to moderate, albeit highly localised, adverse effect on the character and appearance of the area, and as such would conflict with the objective of one of the policies of the plan. But he doesn't say, if you like, whether that is as a consequence or mitigated specifically by the layout he was looking at.
All right. If there aren't any further comments, I have a proposer and seconder for refusal. And yeah, we shall, if it's going against the officer's recommendation, we need the reasons why we're taking that stance before we vote. Councillor Guglielmi.
It's virtually is the layout. It's the our landscapers didn't approve it. It is in the countryside. There's not enough buffer between the two footpaths, the Green Lane and Park, where they're going to be overlooked, especially the one to the park where the apartments are going. It is the layout of the actual proposal. We can't. They've already agreed to the amount of houses in there, so we can't do it. But the layout is certainly it's imposing on the people walking in the footpaths. Yeah, just that basically. Right. And natural habitat, as you all saw this morning, the natural habitat around there will be certainly.
Thank you, Councillor Everett.
Oh, sorry.
If we could weave in the adverse effect that the inspector spoke about, I think that might help in that particular wording of that reason for refusal.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any further points if the proposal is refusal? Sufficient? Yes, just ask.
Yeah, Chairman, just to want to add another thing. Obviously, the lack of a Section 106 being signed and provided would have to be an additional. We normally put that as a standard refusal if members decide to refuse this.
Right. Okay, so we would add that. That's happy with the proposer and seconder that goes in. Right, good. Added to that. It's Morris, yes. Anything further? If not, I'm going to move on and call for the vote. Nothing further? Right. So you understand what you're voting on. You're voting for refusal, which is against the officer's proposal, and those are the points that we've just discussed that will be added for the reason for refusal. All right, those in favour of refusal, please show. Right, and those against? One abstention, and add me to complete it as an abstention, so 2 abstentions. So it is refused.
Just round the corner, sir.
No, round the corner, sir. That's it. What have we got now? Rear of Little Clacton Road, right?
Is Jeff talking?
Yes. Right, the next one in front of us this evening is planning application 18/01/585. This is land to the rear of 62 to 68 Holland Road, Little Clacton. And Alison gets this one, Alison Newland gets this one, so straight over to Alison.
Thank you. So this is an application for outline planning permission for 8 bungalows with all matters reserved. If I could just draw your attention to the update sheet. We've had a change in comments from our public realm officers in relation to the destination for the open space contribution. So the contribution is still justified, but the parish council have come forward with a new project that's within close proximity, so that's where the open space contribution would be spent. So this application has been called in by Councillor Bray for the reasons detailed in the first paragraph. So the site's partly outside of the settlement development boundary. The road is ill-equipped to deal with increased road use of more development. Due to the lack of services nearby, all journeys undertaken by future residents would require the use of a private car, thus meaning the site is socially unsustainable, and the size of the development means that any positive impact will not outweigh the harm. So those are Councillor Bray's reasons for calling the application in. So this is the application site. It lies outside of the settlement development boundary, except for this part of the access here, so the current adopted plan settlement boundary runs along here. So this site is wholly outside both the emerging and the saved local plan. The site lies within the local green gap of the saved plan and the strategic green gap of the emerging plan. You can see the application site here. And this is the indicative layout, so all matters are reserved. This is just showing how 8 bungalows could be put onto the site. This just shows you the context of the site. So this is the application site. As I said, this part is in the adopted settlement boundary. The emerging settlement boundary is the yellow line, which you can see, which includes this section, but again, the site is outside. You've got 2 recent permissions which are either built or being built out at the moment you would have seen on your site visit. So the settlement boundary has been changed. It's been changed to include these sites, and the local plan, the local green gap, has also been removed from this section. It's not within the strategic green gap in the emerging local plan, but this site lies wholly within that. So these are some views from the site. So you've got this neighbouring bungalow to one side. This is the access drive. And this is the neighbour to the other side. So they've both got garages on the facing elevation. This is the access drive. And you see the site's mainly laid to grass. These are the farm buildings at the back on the right. And then this is the main bulk of the site, which is laid to garden, laid to grass. There aren't any significant trees. There's some boundary hedgerow. Take you back. As I said, this is the indicative layout. So the tilted balance of the framework is engaged, so we need to assess the application against the 3 strands of sustainability. It's in close proximity to the main settlement of Little Clacton, so it's socially sustainable. It's easily walking distance to services. It's economically sustainable, and in terms of environmental sustainability, you'll see the report assesses it against backland policies. There is a lot of backland development in this area. It's not out of character in this area, and you'll see that it complies with that policy, except for the fact that it lies outside the settlement boundary. The local green gap purpose of those policies is to prevent the coalescence of settlements and to protect their rural settings. So you'll see with residential development and backland development approved along here, this site will be directly adjacent to those. So in officer's opinion, in this context, the proposal isn't considered to compromise the integrity of the green gap designation. There's a reference in the report by the parish council that there's a very similar site and that this application should be treated in the same manner. This is the application they're talking about. So this is our application site. This application was refused. You can see it's got a very different access arrangement, very contrived access arrangement. So we refused that on the grounds it was outside the settlement boundary. The backland siting was harmful to the spacious character, uncharacteristically small plot sizes. That was for 5 bungalows, that site. And crucially, this awkward access. We've also got a new application that's undetermined at the moment, which moves the access in this location, but we have got another highways objection to that. Again, it's a different situation to this site. So in our opinion, it's not comparable. So this application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions on the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we don't have a member of the public speaking either in favour or against the application, and my understanding is that we don't have a parish or town council. Oh, we do have, I beg your pardon, on my sheet, yes, the chairman of the parish council, Mr. Cutting, Councillor Cutting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, councillors. Basically, enough is enough. I don't know how many times I've been here before you arguing against the creeping applications, which is about 21 to 25 at the moment along Holland Road, usually of 8 properties, which is now led, in my view, to an overdevelopment of the road with extra traffic making the residents' lives a misery. The overdevelopment of Little Clacton and surrounding areas cannot be allowed to continue. We are still being deluged with many applications because we still do not have a credible local plan in place to protect us. All planning applications quote the NPPF presumption in favour of a sustainable developer. I submit to you that Little Clacton does not qualify as being sustainable. I have a Freedom of Information report that in the 5 years up to 2018, 333 planning applications have been granted for approval in our village. That does not include the past year, and I would guess you can add another 50 or more to that figure. All approved on the same criteria as being sustainable and measured on the same criteria. But that can't be right. The demographics in Little Clacton have changed in the way of development and residents since 2013. But the infrastructure has not. Our roads are constantly flooded due to the incapacity of the drains. Our only school is full to the brim. We have no railway station, we have no medical facility, infrequent bus service, and still only 2 convenience stores. Constant traffic that is increasing day by day due to the increase of housing. So my argument is that sustainability cannot be measured the same as 2013. My argument is that although applications must be judged individually and on their own merit, sustainability needs to be looked at in the wider context. Enough is enough. We are full, and until government agencies upgrade the infrastructure, we are, in my view, unsustainable. Looking at the bigger picture, we are surrounded by massive developments. Looking at the bigger picture, we are surrounded by massive developments that are and will in the future have a huge impact on our road network. That is in the 3 roads out of Clacton, one coming straight through our village. What a mess. I believe there is enough in the National Planning Policy Framework and what's left of our SAVE policies to refuse. We are not sustainable. I would say use the policies in the National Planning Policy Framework to protect the residents. Let's have a presumption in favour of residents. Enough is enough.
Thank you, Councillor Cutting. And now Councillor Bray, the ward councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening to you. Good evening, committee members and officers. I did call this application in, and when we look at it initially, we see that it is outside the boundary, it's in the green gap, it's backland development, it's on a busy road, it is God knows how many times we've had 8 houses built in a backland development along Holland Road, but it's reaching the point where you can barely go 50 yards without there being a turning. It's becoming dangerous. I'm starting to wonder what it is that would gain a recommendation for refusal from an officer on an application like this. Backland, inside the green gap, outside the boundary. What is it that isn't acceptable? Because it's starting to become very unclear. Sustainability, one of the reasons I called it in was the sustainability issue, the social sustainability issue. Little Clacton does not have a railway station. It has a very, very limited bus service. And where this is situated on Holland Road, that side of the road, it has no pathway either. And I can assure you, having recently had need to walk Holland Road on that side of the road, it's not a particularly clever thing to do. That means, Chairman, that every single journey undertaken by anybody living in one of those houses would need to be undertaken by a privately owned vehicle, which is completely contrary to what the National Policy Planning Framework tells us is sustainable development. There are many reasons why this should not be built. It is, again, the wrong development in the wrong place. Another 8 is convenient, the number 8. And that's my principal concern. There's plenty of reason to refuse this. But, Chairman, I have an even bigger concern, which is even if you're minded not to refuse this, it carries with it no affordable housing. There is no recommendation from our officers for affordable housing on this, and I can see on the face of it why that would be the case. This council's position on affordable housing is best described as dire, and it needs dealing with. So the question is, should there be affordable housing on this particular development and others like it? And my memory goes back to a meeting some time back, because there is, of course, more than one criteria for a requirement for affordable housing. And can I suggest, Chairman, that the committee look to National Policy Planning Framework, paragraphs 63, 64, and take them in conjunction with the appendix of National Policy Planning Framework 2. The first will tell you that all large developments require affordable housing, and the appendix on National Policy Planning Framework 2 will define what constitutes large developments. When you add those two things together, it is annoying that affordable housing has not been included, and I'm sure that will be debated by committee members in a moment. And it's not the first time it's not been included. It worries me considerably that the reason that our position on affordable housing is dire is because we are not applying it when we should. And it's time, Chairman, that we did. In summary, there are very good reasons to refuse this yet another 8 houses on the same very narrow, very busy road. But even if you don't, there are very serious reasons for affordable housing. It is also the case that the developer at these meetings always speaks last and therefore gets the last laugh and the opportunity to attack what I've said. And it may be the case that the developer suggests that the plan is smaller than the plan suggests it is. But that is not relevant. The plan states its size, and the size is relevant. It may also be the case that the developer suggests that affordable housing on this application would make it unviable. Maybe so, but that is for the developer or his agent to prove, as is a requirement of the National Policy Planning Framework. In short, Chairman, this should be refused, but if it isn't, it certainly should have affordable housing. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman, members. Chairman, what perhaps hasn't been reported in the committee report or the presentation is, in fact, there's been 4 other planning permissions granted along this stretch of the road. Members, I'm sure, will remember Councillor Skill's proposal, the initial proposal, and there's been 3 further permissions since that time. None of those this committee found any fault with and recognised that the sites were sustainable. I would also equally point out that Little Clacton is recognised as a key settlement, one of, I think, 5 or 6 key settlements in the district. If development cannot take place in Little Clacton, then frankly you're saying it can't take place in any of the other key settlements within the district. What also the presentation didn't show was, in fact, there is an extant planning permission for a significant extension of the Firs caravan park to the south. That, in effect, intrudes into that green gap with a considerable number of mobile homes, effectively blocking the appearance of the countryside to the south. Certainly, other land to the east, I believe, is designated appropriately for a green gap, but certainly not this site. And as members saw on the site visit today, the bungalows coming up to the back boundary of the site now means that, as set out in the report, there is development effectively on most sides of this site. Mention's been made about facilities for the village. That's the NHS, county highways, and others. Clearly, those are matters of infrastructure and matters for those authorities elsewhere, not for you to consider as part of an individual planning application. I'd also point out that the NPPF is very clear and precise that affordable housing is not expected on a site of less than 0.5 of a hectare. This site is not more than 0.5 of a hectare. I'm sure your officers will confirm that. There is no legal requirement as set out by the government for affordable housing on this site. I think just to conclude, Chairman, this site is merely an extension of the 4 other permissions that you have granted permission alongside Holland Road. Of all of those schemes, and members will be aware that I've been involved with 2 of those proposals. This, to me, is the most logical. It squares up the settlement along that side of the road, and given the nature and character of Little Clacton, it would be very difficult to sustain an appeal decision on this site. I would also point out the appeal decision for the street that was granted on a public inquiry, which clearly accepted that Little Clacton was a sustainable settlement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Ms Newland if she would like to comment, certainly on the affordable housing one.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to clarify. So the site is 0.49 of a hectare, so it's below the threshold of 10 units and it's below the site threshold, so it doesn't need to provide affordable housing, just the open space and RAMs as detailed in the report. Thank you.
Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I wonder if you'd look at the question on the application form about the size of the site and confirm to me what it says on the application form the size of this site is.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, it's been amended, so it was originally just over. It was 0.52, I think, but it's been amended to 0.49. So there's been a small amendment to this part of the site to take it below the threshold.
At the time that amendment was made, another application form was also submitted, and on that second application form it also says 0.52 hectares. Can you confirm, please?
Yeah, that is right, but we can get that amended. So it's an error on the application form, but we've plotted it, and so it comes out as 0.49 of a hectare.
So what you are saying is that the information on the system that is available to us as councillors to make decisions on planning applications is in fact wrong, and you're now telling us that it's a different number from the evidence that we actually have in front of us.
The application form is incorrect, but the committee report is correct, yeah.
Where does it say in the committee report?
On page 51. On paragraph 6.1.
Councillor Holmes? Councillor Holmes, sorry.
Microphone, John. Yeah, sorry, Alison. How do we stand on the numbers, the 5-year numbers?
So if you look at the summary in your report, very detailed. Yeah, page 47 is our standard paragraph in relation to housing supply. So the framework says that we need to assess applications using the standard method. We've had a recent appeal decision that backs us up. We've got unusual circumstances in tendering in relation to the population statistics, which are detailed there in the report, that the census data is inaccurate for tendering, which skews the 5-year supply, taking the standard method into account. So if you take the standard method into account, we've got a deficit in 5-year supply. But in reality, when you take the incorrect census data into account,
it falls below 5 years.
it technically does against the standard method, which the framework says that you need to use. And because it does fall below that, then the tilted balance is engaged, where we talk about the 3 strands of sustainability, marginally below, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yes, Councillor Benson.
Thank you. Could we have a look again at the site? There are two areas. There's a piece that is cultivated with some birches on, and then there's a barrier across between the cultivated section and the section behind that.
In the photographs?
There were some photographs. And yes, I mean, there's the garden, there's the cultivated bit. Can you tell me the difference in size between the cultivated bit with the trees and the bit behind, which is not in the, I understand that's not in the emerging local plan or whatever. Is it that's still in green belt? That's.
You talking about this?
Yes, that larger piece. The bit with the yellow round, between the yellow and the blue, is that is the bit that can be built on at the moment, isn't it? But the rest of it is, I think we understood this morning that part of that site can be incorporated because it's adjacent to the bit that's in the site. I didn't quite understand, but there are 2 areas, and one of the areas at the back is much larger. Sorry? Yeah.
So, are you talking about the settlement boundary? So that the fact that this section is in the adopted 2007 plan. Yeah. The yellow shows our emerging plan boundary, which does this.
So that red bit, what is that red bit then?
The red is the application site here.
Yeah, but and most of it lies outside the settlement boundary.
Yes.
So So if that lies outside the settlement boundary, why are we being asked to approve something that lies outside the settlement boundary?
Because it's the tilted balance in the framework that we have to assess whether it's sustainable against those 3 strands. And in this location, it's socially sustainable because you've got services within walking distance, public transport links, but it's environmentally sustainable because we said there wouldn't be an overriding conflict with the green gap designation because of these existing developments. It's going to be backed up to residential development on 2 of its boundaries. You've got piggeries here, so there wouldn't be material harm, in our opinion, to make it environmentally unsustainable. So it would pass those 3 strands of sustainability.
Yes.
So in effect, then, anything that's built on, anything further that people want to build on, they can argue the same argument, say, well, it's next to that, so it's not going to make any difference because something's been built there, so you can have a knock-on effect and you can just carry on building everywhere on that explanation.
We'd have to assess each on its merits, obviously, and again, highway safety, other issues arise, like the site that we have refused under delegated powers because it can't get a safe access that wouldn't have harm to neighbours or wouldn't be safe in terms of vehicles passing or visibility displays. So it's each site on its merits.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. A quick question, first of all. We're judging the the numbers, the 5-year supply on 850 now rather than 550, is that correct? What's the numbers we've got to supply? It was 550.
Okay, so we're required to use the standard method for calculating 5-year supply or the need, and use that for development management purposes, and that figure is in the mid-800s, yeah, rather than 550.
Come back.
Thank you. Okay, well, we can't do anything on that then. What I would like to say is that I'd like to make a couple of points. It was said that there's already 2 developments further down the road which were passed quite easily. I would just like to make this one point, is that the further it goes to the right, as I'm looking at it, is the further away that it is the amenities. The other 2 were closer to the amenities. Yeah. Another point I'd like to make really is, only to back up what people have already said, is the fact that we're making our villages into towns, and it is outside the local the plan. In the old days, that would be outside the local plan. It had been thrown out. It wouldn't have touched the sides, and yet we're allowing everything to gradually close the green gaps. And whether we pass or fail it, I have to say I don't like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Everett.
I'd like to bring in a bit of a discussion around green gap here. Members will be aware that in the last few days, the Edenside development, we actually managed to win the appeal against a developer wishing to build into the green gap. Very similar situation to this, actually. On the edge of existing built area, but going into the green gap. And the whole thrust of the argument throughout that public inquiry was firstly, exactly as previous councillors just said, was around the fact that we do not have a 5-year housing land supply, so therefore we have to accept that the presumption in favour of development applies. However, the weighting is not affected by that because of the nature of the 857 figure for housing, as opposed to the previous 550, is unreasonable, I think was the word that the inspector used, but I'm sure I'll be corrected if that's not correct, to then believe that therefore there is less weighting on policies because of that fact. So that affected specifically QL1, which is one of the policies here that we're looking at, because it is about being outside the settlement boundary, and also the green gap, which I think is EN2, if I remember correctly. And so actually there's a lot of parallel between that last judgment from the Planning Inspectorate and this. It isn't exactly the same, smaller numbers involved, slightly different setup. But nevertheless, it does give us guidance that there are reasonable reasons for refusal in this case.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask, if I may, staying with the planning history on the indicative plan, I'd like to look at what is there now, existingly there, next door to the proposed plot. Is that a mixed media of small houses, I believe in bungalows?
My recollection is that's what we saw across the field this morning, wasn't it?
Are you talking about this cluster of buildings, or are you talking about the site here? Here? No. Oh, no. Yeah, these are bungalows approved. I think they're referred to in the planning history. Yeah, so 2009, 9 bungalows approved in January 2018.
And the second thing I'd like to ask, if we drop down to where the static caravans, is that correct? Move along, please, to the right. My Right,
Yes.
my right, your left. That's it. I believe that is going to be static caravans. What is that? Is that holiday use, please? Okay.
It's off the map, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yes, that's about where it is, isn't it?
Oh, we think there's a permission for a caravan to an extension to the holiday park there, yeah.
May I come back, Chair? Right, moving up then, there's a piece of, shall we say, no man's land in between, underneath of the proposed development. Could you put your icon onto that for me, please? That's fine. Is that also within the ensuing plan as a development area?
That's outside the settlement boundary. So the yellow line here is the emerging settlement boundary. It's been increased to include this permission. And then it carries on along the back there. So all this land is outside.
So it's logical to think that that piece of land could be subject to a planning in the future, and that if we look at that indicative plan as we see it now, to the right-hand side of that of the proposed development, you could see little plots of 8 just sneaking along, one after the other, instead of any major development, small individual 8 to 9 plots. Would you say that was a fair statement?
Again, we'd have to assess each on their merits and depending on where we are in terms of 5-year supply. But this current site obviously abuts our emerging settlement boundary, which that wouldn't. But again, it would depend on where we were. Hopefully we would have a more secure 5-year supply by the time any sites there came forward.
So what I'm trying to establish here is that surrounding this whole development, further applications could be placed before a committee. We may not be here ourselves, but a committee of such, or yourselves, for making a delegated decision. Is that correct?
Yes, there's always a possibility, especially when we've had these relatively recent approvals. But it depends on the circumstances at the time that's submitted.
Councillor Everett.
And I'd like to follow on that theme, please, which is normally a blue line on these things, indicates land under the control or ownership of the applicant, and a red line for the edge of the plot for approval. In this situation, where is there any other land outside this application area that is under the control or ownership of the applicant?
There is, yes, that's what this blue line shows in this case. So it's this property, the application site you can see, and then the site carries on beyond.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit worried that there seems to be a fashion, particularly in Little Clacton, but it's elsewhere as well, of what, I don't know whether this is the correct term, of tandem developments, where developments are kept under a threshold so they don't attract affordable housing, and then they just build the next bit along, and then the next bit along, and then the next bit along, in groups of 8 or 10. I'm concerned that this is one of those, and I'm particularly concerned that, in fact, the second iteration of this plan that we see before us tonight is brought to
under 5 hectares, when the original one, which actually didn't have that kink at the bottom, actually took it over 5 hectares. So somebody spotted, oh, we're going to have to do affordable housing. And so they took that bit out to make sure that they were under the threshold. Now, I don't know whether that's the case or not. I cannot say hand on heart that that is the case, but I find it suspicious. And I think I'm sufficiently worried that this actually may just be, yes, one application before us that is only 8 houses, but that actually it is part of a bigger picture, and that in fact that there are going to be more, and there are going to be subsequent applications. When they built that 8, there'll be the next 8, etc., etc. So I'm concerned, and I think the committee might take a view on that. So I'd like to propose that we refuse this development on the grounds that it is outside the settlement boundary, it is encroaching into the green gap, and any other reasons that any other committee members feel that they would like to add.
I'll call for a second and then allow people to speak. Yes. Do I have a seconder? I do. Right. Thank you. Now, Councillor Brown. Oh, I see you were going to second it. Right. Yep. Right. Yes. Before we go any further, I was going to...
Just in relation to that, the problem of developers splitting sites to get around contributions, we've won appeals on those grounds where clearly the land was in the same ownership at the time, even if it's recently sold, we've won those on appeal, and the new site would have, combined with this site, would have to provide, so that's not an issue for officers. I just wanted to clarify that the planning permission for the extension to the caravan park includes all of this land, so it would sit up to the boundary of this application site, there would be no gap in the middle.
Right. Proposer and seconder we have. We've had 2 reasons for going against the officer's decision. Any further comments? And before I take the vote, I'll... yes? Councillor Benison?
Thank you. I wonder whether Councillor Everett would consider adding limited sustainability to those lists of reasons for refusal. Thank you.
Right. Yes, we just got... Well, I'll ask Councillor Baker to elaborate. All right. Okay.
Just on Councillor Benison's point, obviously we would need to single out which of the 3 strands of sustainability you're objecting to. Environmental sustainability in terms of green gap harm we can support as officers, but social sustainability would be difficult, very difficult, with other appeals in the area. And we'd need a second reason for refusal for the open space and the RAMS contribution for the 106.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask again, the holiday caravan doohickey thing, am I right in saying that that goes right up and encroaches right onto the bottom of that land?
Yes.
Yes, because I actually knew that, and I was concerned that I was told it wasn't to do that, because that makes a big difference to what we see before us now, because there was only any... if you're moving along, there's only one way you can go, and that's to the right. Thank you very much indeed.
Right. So we have got proposer, a seconder for refusal with three items now, plus the 106 that's just been mentioned, 4 items. I was just about to take the vote, and I'll go straight to the officer. Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify if the social sustainability had been taken out, the objection, if it was just the environmental.
Right. Now then, in that case, I'm going to put it to the vote. Those in favour of refusal, please show. And I shall join that one. So that is unanimous. Thank you very much. So the application is refused. Now, the next item on the agenda would be one which I suspect could be controversial, so I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break at this stage. If anybody wishes to use it. Oh. Right, let's get underway. That was clever.
Oh, yeah, you've got... I'd crack the table if that was me.
Right, councillors. Planning application that we're looking at now is a Red House, High Street, Great Oakley. We all visited the site. And this morning, I'm going to ask Alison to lead us on this one.
Thank you. If we could start off with the update sheet again on this one. So we've had an email from the agent, which is summarised there. I think it's similar to one that was sent directly to members of the committee. And importantly, the proposed car park's been deleted from the application. So you'll see it's been removed from the description and it doesn't form part of the application. So reason for refusal number 3 has been removed, which moves reason for refusal 4 up to number 3. That one's been amended. It's just some minor changes to the wording for us to make the condition more enforceable and to tie it more specifically to policies and regulations. Reason for refusal 1 has been amended as well to confirm that the harm would be less than substantial in terms of assessing it under the National Planning Policy Framework. So it would be paragraph 196 that would apply. Again, that results in corrections to a couple of paragraphs of the report. So that's just to clarify those points. So this application is for demolition of the Red House, which is a building within the conservation area, so that needs planning permission in its own right to be demolished, and then for it to be redeveloped for a community hub incorporating cafe, tea rooms and community and social centre and 3 one-bedroom flats above. So the application has been called in by Mike Bush. He wholly supports the scheme, which will see the reconstruction of a building in extremely poor condition that is not historically listed. He states there are significant benefits that outweigh the harm caused by the demolition, namely an improved street scene, infilling the gap in the street scene between Red House and Maybush Inn, provision of public garden and rental accommodation, and provision of a community facility within the village. So this is the application site. You've got the Maybush Public House here, which is blue-lined in the same ownership, and then the Red House is here. This is garden land that wraps around to the side. So this shows you the site that's in the middle of the Great Oakley Conservation Area. So the building isn't listed, but it's a positively contributing building within the conservation area, so it's classed as a non-designated heritage asset and is protected in that respect under the framework. And because of its size, it needs planning permission to be demolished because it's in the conservation area. You've got Farm Road on this boundary and High Street, so the building turns the corner. It's very prominent in the conservation area. It's referred to in the conservation area appraisal, as you'll see in the report, as being a very positive and prominent building within the centre of the village. This shows you the block plans. It's proposed to have undercroft access here. The building was originally linked to the Maybush. You will have seen the photo that was circulated that shows that. But this would have access underneath to a parking area and a small amenity area at the back. So these show you the condition of the building at the moment. You will have seen it on the site visit. It turns the corner there of Farm Road and the High Street. That's the High Street elevation. This is a longer view along the High Street. You'll see in the report that it's an important non-designated heritage asset on a corner plot, faces onto the village square, and it's a key facade facing both the High Street and Farm Road. The Conservation Area Appraisal states that the High Street in this location is the most consistently developed frontage in the village, as all the properties rise from the back of the pavement and have roofs parallel to the main road, and that Red House here continues along that strong character. This is the front elevation, and this is the current gap between the Maybush Inn and Red House, which, again, in the past there was a building linking the two, which you will have seen. This is looking up Farm Road, a Red House at the top. So these are the existing elevations. You can see that plain elevation and the roof along along the High Street. And this is the rear. So these are the proposals. We've had a previous refusal which objected on the grounds that the windows break the eaves line. They still do. Their windows are reduced in size from the refusal, which I'll show you shortly, but fundamentally they still break the eaves line, which is a big issue for us because it's such a strong character along the High Street, as you will have seen from those photos. You've also got the link with the Undercroft facing onto Farm Road, which it's considered to be out of character and harmful to the character and appearance of the conservation area to have this Undercroft link. There was a building there previously, but there was no Undercroft link, which is not considered acceptable. So that's the rear elevation, looking out from the parking area back. And these are the floor plans. They show that you've got the cafe community use on the ground floor and then 3 flats above. And these are the refuse schemes. You can see the changes aren't substantial. They've reduced the size of the windows, and there's been some changes to the access here, and that's that rear elevation. So under Safe Policy EN20, the building is protected from demolition because it makes a positive contribution to the Great Oakley Conservation Area. So EN20 says that demolition is only permitted where it's been demonstrated that the building is beyond economic repair, and that then, as a second part, that the redevelopment would preserve the area's character and produce substantial benefits that would outweigh the loss of the building. You'll see in the report that, as officers, we're not satisfied that the demolition has been justified, and also that we're not happy with the replacement proposal. I'll just highlight some parts of the structural survey that's been submitted. So the conclusions are that it's a general overview of the apparent condition of the existing structure based on the findings of a visual inspection. They weren't able to accurately define the exact nature and cause of the damage and movement evident. In order to establish the exact causes of the damage and the appropriate scope and the full extent of repairs required, a much more detailed investigation would be needed. They state the severity of the damage noted is Category 3 if based on crack width alone, which means that cracks that require some opening up can be patched by a mason. They're typically sort of 3 millimetres wide, so they're not significant. But the general condition of the building and the configuration and condition of the existing structure is such that large-scale repairs and replacement will be required. In this regard, it's arguable that the overall condition of the building could be considered to be commensurate with Category 4 or 5 due to the extent and amount of work required. So Category 4 is extensive damage, which requires breaking out and replacing section of walls, especially over doors and windows. Category 5, structural damage that requires a major repair job, partial or complete rebuild. So they list works required in terms of reconstruction, partial reconstruction of walls, internal steel frameworks to provide support to the walls, replacement of most of the roof structure and most of the first floor, remedial masonry tying measures, and damp proofing and waterproofing. There is no detailed costings. They say the above works are likely to be slow, intensive and expensive. And then they go on to say that the required redevelopment would want a first floor construction that needs a separating floor to divide the ground floor and the first floor premises. I think because you've got public access with a cafe at the ground floor and then the flats above, they would need more substantial separation between the floors. They're saying it's difficult to see how this would be possible considering the condition and the shallow depth of the existing floor structure. But clearly that's something specific to their requirement for the redevelopment. The existing use was as a dwelling, and if it was retained as a dwelling, then you wouldn't have those requirements. There's also different comments about how the floor level needs to be raised because it's below the level of the path, but clearly that's not an uncommon situation in listed buildings where the roads have been built up over the years since they've been built. So again, it's not something that necessarily needs to be done to bring that back into use. It's been in use as a dwelling. It just doesn't meet the use that they're proposing. You'll see the detailed comments from Essex County Council Historic Buildings Manager, who agrees that the application should be refused. It's not been justified in terms of the demolition, and also that the redesign isn't satisfactory, that it's a pastiche that we shouldn't be supporting in the conservation area. So the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you very much. Now we do have speakers. Mr. Tom Howard speaking in favour of the application. Now, Mr. Howard, you're well experienced and appreciate you only get 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Officer's executive summary omits half of the only sentence about the Red House in the Great Oakley Conservation Area review, which begins the Red House in a state of exterior disrepair. During the 13 years since the Conservation Review, the Red House has continued to deteriorate. Section 6.16 of the Officer's report infers that the form, age and materials of the building are at risk from this application, when in fact the removal of the wrong render and the PVC windows and the replacement with original brick and wooden frames enhances the form and materials. Similarly, Section 6.16 and 6.37 of the Officer's report, claiming that significant harm has been identified in relation to the application, are incorrect, as it is an enhancement, where the building will be recreated with a brick finish using existing bricks where possible and reconnecting the Red House to the Maybush. This will make the street scene of this corner site far nearer to the way it was circa 1900 than it is now. The use of the wrong render has damaged the brickwork, meaning that controlled removal is likely to be needed to avoid collapse. But the report concentrates on the emotive demolition rather than the rebuild with saved materials. The application will save and enhance the Red House following years of neglect and will be an enhancement as opposed to the significant harm mentioned in the Officer's report. Therefore, Section 1.7 under the Habitat Regulations is not an issue and could be addressed by attaching a planning condition if needed. Criteria for safe policies EN20 and EN17 are met, as this application will preserve the area's character and will produce substantial benefits, as the Red House will be returned to a red brick building, after which it was named, linked to the Maybush as it was circa 1900. The window frames will be returned to being wood instead of PVC. Tea rooms will provide a need identified when the community hub was formed. 3 flats will be provided in the centre of the village, enabling local people to remain in the village. Decades of decline of this building will be halted. Local tradesmen will complete the work. Improved services to the community will be provided. The Red House is a non-designated heritage asset, which is the minimum status of any building in a conservation area. Approval of this application, including 3 social housing flats, will help this council meet the objectively assessed future housing needs of the district as required by the MPPF. The wider context of the immediate surroundings of the site needs consideration. Directly opposite, within the same conservation area, 3 imposing modern houses have been built that dwarf the street scene, are entirely out of keeping with the conservation area. These were approved by this council in 2001 to supersede permission originally granted by this council in 1995 to build 4 small cottages that were in keeping with the street scene. The 2001 decision by this council set a precedent, meaning that refusal of this application could leave this council exposed on appeal and liable for costs. It is better to be pragmatic and to recognise the many strengths of this application. It is better to approve the application with conditions to address your concerns than lose control of the planning process by refusal and losing an appeal. I urge the committee to sympathetically consider my representation and to approve this application, enabling the site to be returned to its heyday of circa 1900 and to benefit the community by providing improved services and additional housing for local people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I have nobody speaking against the application, and I don't believe the parish council wishes to speak, in which case it's the ward member, Councillor Mike Bush.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening,
councillors and officers. Firstly, I reaffirm my declaration that I have a peculiar interest in this application as a member, a stakeholder amongst 172 members and volunteers, and a member of the Management Committee of the Great Oakley Community Hub, which is a not-for-profit organisation. I call this application in as ward member and support this application, which I believe has material planning consideration benefits in accordance with relevant policies, many which have been spoken by a previous speaker, and hugely community benefits to Great Oakley and the neighbouring villages. I trust the member's site visit earlier today was beneficial, experiencing and observing a building laid bare in helping you assist your decision this evening. The Red House property is in extremely poor condition, structurally, decoratively, enduring unsympathetic renovations and modern UPVC windows and external render which has irrevocably damaged the fenestration. I could go on, but I do not wish to dwell further on these particular elements as this has been evidenced in surveyors' reports. The question of historical value and imposing pivotal building on the corner plot of conservation has been sought through Historic England, and their assessment in September 2018 was that the Red House, although dated 19th century, was not recommended for listing as it has no architectural or historic merit. I am extremely disappointed with the officer's recommendations to refuse this application, in particular reference to points 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 of the report. I fail to accept that this property positively contributes to the appearance of Great Oakley Conservation Area. There are no historic, aesthetic or communal values determined, and the proposed new development is more sympathetic and in keeping with the original Victorian street scene than what currently exists. Having skipped through the physical properties and appearance of this building, I wish to focus on the vitally important community benefits that this development offers, both to the local, neighbouring communities, visitors, ramblers and other groups interested in our village. There are no cafes or eateries to offer breakfast, lunch, a common place in the village for people to meet, greet and eat. We are all mindful also of isolation, particularly in the rural locations of our villages, which have 36% population aged over 60 and a 20% population up to the age of 19 years. Why should the young and the elderly of our communities need to drive 5 miles or rely on public transport to travel for lunch, to meet friends, when this facility could be here on our own doorstep? Not much has been mentioned about the 3 proposed first floor single flats that's being managed by, or proposed to be managed by, the Community Hub, which addresses a much need and currently unavailable affordable rentable accommodation for the community. To offer those who wish to start out and remain in the village, and for those who wish to downsize and spend their latter days in the community housing that they belong. This application is more than bricks and mortar and saving a dwelling that was allowed to fall into conditions beyond economical repair, in my opinion. This application is building our foundation, building pillars which support people and support communities. I wish to remind officers and councillors of the TDC Corporate Plan 216 and 220, community leadership, our vision and what we will achieve, engagement with the community, support the vulnerable and support rural communities. If this application is refused this evening, it would be deemed that this council have failed to uphold their values and broken their promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bush. And now the agent for the application, Mr. Legree.
Chairman, the officer's report, first and foremost, talks about the condition of the building. You will have seen in correspondence of the very serious concerns, which we will be raising further, that no officer has even attempted to see inside this building. This is the second application. No officer has been to the site to see inside the building. Moreover, the county conservation specialist, upon which a large chunk of this report refers, and in fact the wording for the reason for refusal, first reason for refusal, is taken almost direct from his report, hasn't even visited Great Oakley. Emphasis has been placed on economic repair. The important consideration in this case is what is the repairs likely to involve. We believe that even if whatever money, if money was no objective, then what you would have left if you tried to repair this building would be virtually nothing. yes, there might be a few bits of timber you could salvage. Most of the building, particularly the timbers you could see inside the building, are actually from the 20th century. They're certainly not 200 years old. Very little of the building is of that age. But notwithstanding that, the condition of the building just cannot justify a repair, regardless of the economics. That's the purpose of the report, and as mentioned by the officer, it's of such a category that it says substantial, if not complete, rebuilding would be necessary. No evidence has been produced by the council to contradict that report. The officers could and should have obtained their own evidence to contradict that report. There is none whatsoever. No attempt has been made by officers to discuss this scheme, to visit the site, to examine the issues being raised in terms of the design, and yet the comment received back from the officer was, we have been positive and proactive. I have to say, I have never seen such positivity and proactive response ever. In terms of the comments about the level of the building, as a restoration or even a rebuild, you would not get a dispensation under the building regulations because this building is not listed. Just because it's in a conservation area does not give you those dispensations. I would urge members, if they are passing through Great Oakley at any time, visit the Maybush. It's fantastic. I visit many, many rural pubs. I have not seen one that has such a community activity and livelihood in a pub in a small village like the Maybush. It's quite outstanding. Not only is that, the beer is also pretty damn cheap. But even on a Tuesday night, it's still good. I would conclude by drawing your attention to paragraph 196 of the MPPF. That's mentioned in your officer's update. The officers accept that less than substantial harm would be caused by the demolition of this building. NPPF paragraph 196 continues that by saying such schemes should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. So disregarding the visual appearance, disregarding the structural elements of the scheme, you must consider this application against the public benefits. I have to say that no part of the officer's presentation and 12 lines in the report refer to the public benefits of the scheme. They were fully detailed within the application. You've heard Councillor Bush express some of those in his few minutes. There are some very fundamental public benefits. I ask you to weigh those up against the concern that's being raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Alison, do you wish to add anything to anything that's been said? All right. Right. That's our list of speakers. Alison doesn't wish to add anything. So, councillors, Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one or two things I'd like to say, if I may. First thing I'd like to say is that when I left first thing this morning to join the bus and to go down, knowing the area as I do, being sort of bred and born in the area, I was quite concerned at any thought of demolition. However, when I got on site and we went inside of the building, I was really quite taken back. I have myself, in my working experience and my own lifetime, owned 2 listed buildings. I know exactly what the complications of having such a building and where you can go with it and what is expected and what is expected to look like. And this is the important thing. When I got inside of the building, I didn't see any evidence in great quantities of timbers that had been hand sawn. There was no saw wheels on the side of the large timbers. And in fact, some of them were drilled and screwed with machine-made screws and nails, which indicates their time span. Some of the wood was rough cut, but smooth, indicating it had been cut by a machine, and the other timbers had been planed, which was not in existence 200 years ago. The roof timbers were in such a state that they didn't seem man enough to support the weight of the roof, and I was really very disappointed. There was no evidence of any wattle or daub. There was no issue with supporting walls. and the brick was soft red brick. And in the top corners of the two buildings, I saw some very old and rather beautiful and ancient bricks, which I thought were rather nice, but not made here locally, but brought in from outside. So somewhat I changed my mind to a point. I'm wondering, the Essex County Council officer, who we was assured had full knowledge of this and had come down to visit it, I'd like to know, did he actually go inside of the building and look and see what I saw when I went inside of the building? Historic England has not seen it worthy to be made into a listed building. I am assuming that I know Historic England well, and I know what they do. They go in and they will investigate every nook and cranny. If they don't see it fit to be made into a listed building, then I think that I would also like to go along with their findings. And finally, I believe under Essex design that's within these conservation areas, such things as this Essex ship lap board painted black is much frowned upon. 2 or 3 of the houses are covered completely in it from one end to the other. And across the road from the building, there were brand new buildings. I mean, it was evident that they were trying. Okay, they had the facade of a very old and ancient building, but in fact, they weren't. They were modern buildings, and they looked modern. However, they fitted in. But this is the balance that we have to strike, the balance between bringing in modern and blending it with the old. But sometimes you just have to wake up to the reality that a building has come to the end of its life. And I'm not sure, no matter what money that you would pump into that building, that you would ever receive a return for it, because I don't see it happening. And I think maybe the only way forward is to consider a demolition of some sort, or at least to ask the officer to go into the building and to look and to see what I saw, and maybe other members of the committee might have seen.
Thank you very much. Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, following on from what you were just saying there, perhaps it is concerning that an officer hasn't been within that area to actually make the report. But on the other hand, the Heritage is saying that it should not be considered to be demolished. Historic England, if we haven't got a report on Historic England, is there any reason why we couldn't have one? I'm just concerned that I don't want to make the wrong decision here, because I agree with the officer's report. I couldn't go upstairs because of, obviously, for obvious reasons, because I wasn't able to do that. But from what I saw downstairs, it was different. And I don't appreciate the detail that you've gone through, Councillor Alexander. You obviously understand all these things. I just rather feel that there's not enough here. I know what the community is saying, but there's not enough here for us to make a condition, or even to actually make a decision. Would it be possible, if I can ask the question, if Historic England can be involved to give a report, is there a possibility of an independent report that could come to us to let us know exactly how we would stand if we make a decision? Thank you. That's it at the moment.
Would you like to take that one? No?
Please. So you've seen the comments from Essex County Council Historic Buildings Manager, so he's our specialist from Essex County who provides advice to tendering. He hasn't seen inside the building, but it's not a listed building, so none of the inside of the building is protected, so there's nothing we could do for them to remove anything inside the building at the moment. The only thing that's protected is the building because of its size, because of its location within the conservation area. And because it's a positive building, it's clearly in a very important site in the centre of the conservation area with the village square. So it's a very important, positively contributing building in the conservation area, which is run down, but could, in our opinion, be repaired. It hasn't been evidence that it's beyond economic repair. So the issue is the external appearance. So that's something that the historic buildings officer could do from outside. If we get to the point where we've got a detailed survey that says a certain amount of the building could be retained, and we get to a point where we're discussing a detailed design, then we involve them at pre-app. We may then have a meeting on site to talk about detailed design, but this, in our opinion, is too far away from that because we haven't justified the demolition. So we wouldn't get into talking about the detail of the redevelopment until we're happy with the demolition. And in terms of Historic England, they wouldn't be consulted because it's only when you're over 1,000 square metres within a conservation area, because it's not a listed building, so they're not a consultee.
Councillor Holland?
Councillor Brown. Yeah, obviously this is all down to community hub and everything else. It would seem quite reasonable to assume that Mr. Legrees has already said there's a very, very, very good community hub in the village, in the Maybush pub. He seemed to think that was very busy, very loads of people in there, and that's, as far as most villages are concerned, is a community hub. I was in there today. I've driven past this for over 50 odd years, and I don't want to see it go. It may not be protected by the historic, whoever they are, you know, but as far as I'm concerned, do what you want on the inside, and there's the inside, the timbers are really solid. Even the new ones they've put in are pretty solid, but the main load bearers in there were from at least 100 years ago, at least. So I'm in favour of keeping the building. Thank you very much.
Right, I've got Councillor Brown next, and we are building a list, right?
I don't even know where to start with this, really. Let me just make one comment. First of all, I would be one of the first to say keep it. But having been round it, inside it, upstairs, is a massive project. And one thing I've got to agree with Mr. McGree is that if you're going to renovate it and keep it for posterity, what will there actually be left? All the windows are modern. The external rendering is not original. It's been said that if you knock that off, it's going to damage the soft red bricks anyway. So that would be a tremendous problem. I think you can actually regenerate or repair anything, even if you only end up with a brass doorknob. But I think in this case, I think that if a decent design could be produced that preserved the street scene, I think demolition would be the answer. That's my honest opinion. As regards the restaurant, or tea rooms, whatever you want to call it, I think that would do a great thing for Great Oakley. There's not very much there at all. I think it'd be an absolutely great thing for Great Oakley. The pub's a hub, yes, okay, I agree with what was said just now. The pub is a hub, but there's no reason why you shouldn't have a bigger hub. And not everybody wants to have 6 drinks on a Saturday night, when they can go and have one and perhaps a meal or something to eat in a restaurant. What else can I say? I would definitely like to underline the fact that the street scene is very, very important, and I would like to see something a little bit more sympathetic to the street scene than what we saw put on the plan, but enlarged. Basically, I'd like to see it reluctantly demolished.
Right. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I find myself very torn over this one. I can go in every direction. I think, in summary, though, I think the demolition of this building is inevitable for the reasons that Councillor Brown has just outlined, actually, and other speakers have as well. And I think a newly built building on that site is the right thing to do. However, where I have a little bit of a conflict in my mind is the design of that building. And what we have seen submitted to us, I don't think would improve the street scene as it currently is. So that's where my conflict comes in. And equally, there's another conflict which is more to do with process than to do with the merits of it, which is that actually in conservation areas, when you want to demolish a building, you have to go through a particular process, and that hasn't been done. And so, for me, I try to look at what the eventual objective is, and I think the eventual objective of this, to get a building that can be used, that is sympathetic to the street scene, is absolutely the right thing to do. But I don't think the plans we have in front of us do that. So I would like to propose that this council defers this application for discussions with the applicant about securing the correct process to demolish the building and to coming to a street scene more applicable to the locality.
Right, Councillor Baker.
It's difficult, isn't it? I'm just looking at the reasons for refusal, number 1, and what I would have liked to have seen. And as soon as I got the planning agenda, I went straight to read the heritage statement. And in my view, it's not good enough. Yes, it outlines what's there. Mr. Legree has said it cannot be repaired, renovated, regardless of cost. Well, where's the evidence to say that? So EN20, it doesn't comply. Having said that, I can see exactly what the community are trying to do, and I would support them in that. Knocking it down, it's a shame if it has to be, but I would like to see a lot more evidence as to what could be kept, and if nothing can be kept, then fair enough, we'll come to a decision about that. But it states in, and I'm going to quote from their report, if I can find it. I'll get to the page in a minute when I find it. 62. Page 62. It's in the grounds for refusal, and it's in there. It says, in order to establish the exact causes of the damage and the appropriate scope and the full extent of repairs required, a much more detailed investigation would be needed. Cost, obviously, regardless of what you're doing, will play a large part in determining which is the most viable course of action, and professional advice should be sought in this respect. I haven't seen that professional advice, and I would like to see that. I appreciate it's going to be more expense for the applicants, but I think to make a decision that is the right decision for both the building and the community, we need to see that. Well, I say we, those of us that may be here in the future and those that won't. So I would quite happily second your proposal to defer for those reasons. Thank you.
Right, yes, Councillor Alexander?
No, Councillor Guglielmi.
Oh, Guglielmi. Yes, Councillor?
I have to agree with Councillor Baker, actually, that although seeing the building, I actually lived in a building like that, and I actually had it, I lived in it and had it done up around me, to be quite honest, but that had actually been listed at that time, so it couldn't be brought down. The building's lovely as it is, and it is not as dangerous. After going up the stairs, it's not as dangerous as I thought it was going to be. And the thing that concerns me is how they think they're going to get 3 flats above there to make them livable. So I think it's too, what we've got here, the information, seeing it, is not detailed enough. So I think it should be deferred until we get more details on what they say, and for the officers to look inside it and to look into what they've proposed to put in these 3 flats, which to me are, well, unless you want to live in a box, it's okay. I mean, we don't all downsize and live in a box, and I wouldn't want my student daughter living in a box, but I think they have to think more. They have, this hasn't gone into enough detail. I think we need to see more detail. So I will support Councillor Everett on a deferment.
Right. Yes, Councillor, sorry, I was...
Yeah, Chair, I have to agree. I agree with what everyone has said. What I saw this morning is what I endured when I had that same situation. it's going to take an awful lot of money to put this into any form of shape. But I have to say that I think if you have that kind of financial money at your disposal, you could actually turn this into something of nothing is impossible in the building scene nowadays. But there's no structural report as such, and I believe that you are correct in what you're saying, Councillor Baker. We need to see more evidence that that the building is in such a state. I personally, if that was me in this position, I would run a mile from this because I do not have pockets that deep. But I'm quite happy to back this 100% deferral. Let's have some more reports in front of us or the forward committee so they can make an open and honest assessment.
It's Councillor Holmes.
Yeah.
Microphone.
Oh. Yeah, I can just say I was in there today. It's untidy, it's a mess. All the plasterboard's been ripped off the ceilings and everything else. But it's been standing for 200 years, and I should think it's going to stand for another 200 years. We've not that much done to it. You start messing about and trying to make bigger rooms out of smaller rooms and this, that and the other, and you will probably come to problems. But the supporting evidence is submitted but with the application to demolish it. Has there been any supporting evidence to demolish it?
There's been the structural survey, which is a visual assessment, which is, I read parts out, and there's bits in the report. So it's a visual assessment that, in officer's opinion, doesn't go far enough to prove that it's not economically capable of repair.
So it doesn't say it's not viable. They say it's not viable, but a report by a professional says it's not viable because there isn't one. Correct?
Yeah.
And also, I'm concerned here because when we was there this morning, the public house has now taken the red bit at the top as its garden. Right, where that car sits is its garden. Now, we was told this morning that square at the top of that is a house, and they've got a kitchen or a lounge that looks right out on that garden. Okay, and they said that they'd agreed with the people that they put a sort of a wild garden in front of their window. This is what we was told this morning, and nothing was said about the car park because at the moment the whole thing is blocked off. It's on the bound. It's now within the boundary is inside the Maybush. So I can't see how they're going to put 3 car parking spaces in there for a start, because that, according to what's going to happen or what we was told was going to happen, there ain't going to be no room for that 3rd car for a start. So I don't know what's happening there because we're looking at a plan that's not what we're supposed to be voting on.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm getting a list now.
Sorry, I understand from the site visit that there's been a fence put up here, has there? Yeah. To say that this is a separate area, but obviously this lies within the red line in the application site. So if we approved this in the standard way, we would put conditions that the parking spaces as shown are provided prior to occupation of the flats, and that this would be the garden that relates. So that is part of the application site. They haven't formally amended the application.
But if you did that, would that person who lives in that house get a letter to say what's happening? Because I don't think they know what's happening.
They would have been consulted as a neighbour that directly abuts the site.
Yeah, as it is, not with a car stuck right opposite their view.
Now, these are the current plans, so these are the plans they would have been consulted on. They haven't amended the plans to take this section out, whatever they've done on the ground today or recently.
Use the microphone, John.
Sorry. If you was to come to me and say, we've taken over the garden for the Maybush, we're going to put a line along there, the people's only going to believe you. I mean, it actually states in the plan what they're supposed to do, but what they've told people they're going to do is not necessarily the fact. And I understand that is pure hearsay, but it's something that should be taken into account, I think.
But it's something that we could control by condition. So if we would secure a parking space for each of the 3 flats, and if they didn't lay that out to parking, we could pursue a breach of condition. That's why we would put the condition on there, so we can secure it in accordance with the plans.
Right, I'm building a list. I think we've got at least 3 people on it. I'm just going to stick in 2 Peneth, because this morning, you will remember when we were on the bus, I asked you to look at the layout of the conservation area, and Mr. Howard actually drew it too, where we talk about the street scene, and immediately opposite are properties that are at the worst 18 years old, that have destroyed the street scene, to my way of thinking, already. And so any improvements which can be made on the wall by sorting out the window levels, sorting out the window material, and removing the coverage on it, I think will be a tremendous improvement. And if the proposal means that we've got to allow the destruction of it to achieve this, then so be it. I don't think we can hang too much. It isn't listed. It's in the conservation area, exactly the same as those that cross the road, and nobody's ever done anything with those before. I'll leave it to think about it. Councillor McWilliams, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. As you realised, I was very doubtful, and that's why I said defer, because I am still doubtful, even with what you have just said, Chairman. I just feel we haven't got sufficient information in front of us about what is expected of the property, whether it's demolished, whether it stays there, whatever. And I'm inclined to agree. I just feel that the deferment is where we need to go with this one.
I think I've got a proposer for that. I don't think... Have I got a seconder as well? Yes, we have got a seconder. Right. Now, the next one was Councillor Bennison, I think.
I'd forgotten what I was going to say. I can understand the discussion around deferment, and this morning, before we went there, I thought there was merit in retaining a listed building. But since we've been there and I've seen the street scene including the Red House, which has bowed walls, rendering that's coming off. I've heard about the brick underneath that's been damaged by the rendering, and when the rendering's removed, it will damage the brick further. We have plastic windows. We have plasterboard in a lot of the rooms upstairs. We have, as far as I could see, there's no damp-proof course. And I really feel that if this building was demolished, rebuilt sympathetically to match the street scene that does still exist, retain some of the old bricks in the rebuild, I think that would be the much better situation. I also think that the benefits that have been talked about far outweigh any harm that's going to be done. It looks as though there's been neglect over countless decades. The benefits are for the community. I know the Maybush is a thriving community pub, but it's not very big. And to introduce the restaurant side of it and a community area where people can just go in even if they're not going in to eat, there's an area set aside for community. All sorts of things could be incorporated into that community centre. And we have the small flats, which would be ideal for people starting out in their life who currently have to move away from the village to find somewhere to rent. I think those benefits far outweigh any harm that might be done, and I think they would be an enhancement to this area. So I think, rather than deferring, I think we should approve this And this morning I thought totally differently, but having seen it today, I've come to the conclusion that we should not refuse this application. So that's my point. Thank you.
Right. Any further speakers? If not, I have a motion for deferment. I'd ask the officer if she's got anything further to add at this stage. No. The motion is to defer it then to get more information, and we'll come back to another committee when the answers are. Those in favour of deferment, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And those against? 3. The motion is for deferment, then. That is approved. Right, councillors, we move off. This is agenda item 9. It's planning application 15-01745. This is an outline application for the former putting green in Garden Road, Jaywick. And I look along. Suzanne Enos has got it. I'll get her full correct name. Sir.
Can I make a point that Councillor Raby, who's in the audience and who I think will be speaking tonight, didn't hear your initial comments regarding Purda, so I think they probably need to be repeated to him.
Yes, Councillor, if you are speaking on this, and I believe you to be speaking, the announcement I made this morning is to remind you that we are under Purda rules, and therefore you must be very careful not to push it on political grounds. Is that? Yes? Right. Right. Yes, sorry, Suzanne.
Okay. So this is an application which seeks planning permission for the change of use of land to residential to incorporate the erection of 10 dwellings, and it's on land of the former putting green in Garden Road, Jaywick. I'd like to draw members' attention to the update sheet, which refers to 4 additional letters of objection and the status of an agreement dated, well, a covenant stroke agreement dated 1934. So there's some information on that. So this application is in outline form with all matters reserved. The application seeks to establish the principle of residential development only. So the application site is situated on the east side of Garden Road and the west of properties in Gulf Green Road. So you've got properties in Gulf Green Road, located in this location, and the properties in Garden Road. So in terms of the aerial view, the site is outlined in red. It's currently undeveloped and comprises of an area of long grass. From this you can see the relationship with the neighbouring properties and also with the open space to the north and the south of the site. So you would have visited the site this morning, but here are some photographs. This is the site as viewed from Garden Road, and the relationship, the application sites in this location and the properties in Gulf Green Road. And that is looking towards from the application site and see the properties in Garden Road. So you can see there predominantly 1.5 storey and of varying sort of design. And this application shows better the relationship with the properties in Gulf Green Road. So you can see that there are windows that do look out onto the application site. And also from this photograph, you can see the nature of the site itself being long grass. A preliminary ecological appraisal was carried out that identified that further surveys were required, and these were required to confirm if any reptile species used the site. A further reptile survey was carried out, which recorded common lizards and slowworms on the site, and that the proposal would result in significant impacts on reptiles, and therefore a translocation of reptiles to another site would be required. Essex County Council Ecology have been consulted on the application and raised no objections to a financial contribution towards RAMS, which is included in the recommendation, and biodiversity mitigation measures, which would be secured by condition. So I apologise for the darkness of the photograph, but this shows the area of open space to the south of the application site, and the dwellings or the buildings to that location, which are of a different scale to what is in the immediate locality of the application site. It's just to give members a wider view of the area. So in terms of the site allocations within the local plan, they are the same both in the saved and the draft local plan. So the site is approximately in this location, saved local plan, and there in the draft local plan. So the site lies within the settlement development boundary for Jaywick and within the Jaywick regeneration area. The site is also allocated as open green space, and within both the plans, and also with regards to the agreement referred to in the update sheet, it is restricted to open space. As the site is allocated as open space, the proposal is contrary to policies which seek to protect open space. However, as the land is in private ownership, maintenance and access is at the discretion of the owner, and there are no means of assessing or insisting that on this land is that this land is used for open space. So, as mentioned before, this is an outline application, so this block plan is indicative only, but it shows how 10 residential dwellings could be accommodated on the site, with similar plot widths to those in the surrounding areas, whilst retaining a small area of open space in this location. In terms of elevation, this shows indicative elevations. However, given the fact that the site was in the flood zone, the indicative floor levels are a requirement of the Environment Agency, and therefore if the application is refused, any development at reserved matters is likely to be required to be of the height shown. And given this height, there will be an adverse impact on the amenity of the neighbouring residential properties. And this is a matter that needs to be weighed up against the need to regenerate Jaywick as set out in the officer report. Again, these are indicative floor plans which show that parking would be provided at ground level. So there would be no ground floor residential accommodation in accordance with the requirements of the Environment Agency. So the recommendation is for approval, subject to a legal agreement to secure affordable housing, a financial contribution towards RAMS, and a financial contribution towards open space, and also the number of conditions set out in the report. Thank you.
Three minutes.
That's it.
Okay, good. I'll cover 4 points in 3 minutes, including some legal arguments. I'd ask you to focus on the word necessary. There are 1,254 properties for sale on Rightmove today within 3 miles of the development site. 177 are under 100,000. 38 of these are within 400 metres of this site. And for cheapest is 60,000. In terms of housing supply in Jaywick, these properties aren't necessary. The emerging local plan has tendering needs at 550 dwellings per annum. There are currently 3,200 dwellings in 7 large approved developments, 5.8 years of supply. So you've already exceeded your targets. Add medium-sized developments, and this can cover the last 18 years of shortfall. So these dwellings are not necessary to meet the local plan. New topic, flooding. The NPPF has 3 conditions to be met to build on a floodplain. Quote, where land outside flood risk areas cannot appropriately accommodate all the necessary development. The proposal fails at necessary. Quote from the exception test. A, demonstrate that the development provides wider sustainabilities to the community that outweigh the flood risk. Wider benefits are completely absent from the proposals and from the officer's report. The proposal fails 2 of the 3 NPPF legal requirements for a floodplain. New topic, safeguarding green space. Quote, the site is allocated as recreational open space and in the Save Local Plan and safeguarded local green space in the emerging local plan. The proposal is clearly contrary to policy. So, justification? The planning committee does not have control. Surely not. Deciding on the use of private land is what you do. You just don't approve any other use. That's been effective in preserving this green space for at least for the last 30 years of the current ownership. Path 2, the 1934 Jaywick Covenant. It's restrictive and it's still enforceable. The site is reserved as green space, and that applies to, quote, the owner, his heirs, assigns, or successors in title. So, anyone in Jaywick and tendering as the planning authority can challenge residential development. You do have the power to enforce both your local plans. Last topic, buildings. Quote, the proposal is out of character with the existing scale of development and would result in an adverse impact in terms of loss of light, overshadowing and loss of privacy. In December, there are 8 hours of sunlight. Only 2.5 hours make it past these buildings. In summer, Garden Road is completely in shadow until late morning, and Golf Green Road is completely in shadow from afternoon until sunset. This is going to fail at appeal. Quote, in any other location, officers would advise that such a development would be inappropriate. Justification. The strategy for regenerating Jaywick is to actively encourage the redevelopment of the poorest and most vulnerable properties. When you take a field and you put houses on it, that's not redevelopment. That's just development. These are outline plans, but the height of the floors is a condition of approval. If they build low, they fail on flood risk. If they build high, they fail on overshadowing. There is no residential building that meets planning regulations. I implore the committee to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now, what others? I've got the ward member, Councillor Roy Raby.
Thank you, Chairman, and members of the committee. I was there this morning, right?
Microphone.
I was there this morning, right, okay. First of all, I'd like to make a complaint to the officers for not sending me an agenda, and I had to download this myself off the website, okay. I had nothing to go by at the end of the day, and I don't think it was right, so I'd like to make that as a formal complaint. Right. First of all, there is a flood risk on this part of land, okay. There always has been with flood risk. Now, the point is, I put down here, under the ground there is a waterway, right? Now, it's a water table underneath there, which has always been there. It floods when there is a downpour and torrential of rain there at the end of the day. So I'm wondering whether the Environmental Agency have done a risk assessment on this at the end of the day, because, you know, they've done it on up at Jaywick, up at Brooklands, right, okay. And also, looking at that drawing up there of 10 properties, right, okay, with the, I think, is there going to be garages underneath these properties, like there are on the ones that are going up at Brooklands, on Lotus Way? Yep. There is garage space underneath, right, okay, so they're living accommodation as above. They're so tightly together, you could shake hands with the neighbour next door. Now, to be honest, it's what this gentleman's turned around has said, that, you know, they're not in alignment with the rest of the bungalows on the other side of the road. Now, I think myself, how many letters of complaints have you had in? From residents in Garden Road?
Yeah, keep going and we'll give you the answers.
Right, okay. I'm wondering how many you've had from Golf Green Road, which backs onto it as well. Yes, there is an assessment got to be done as far as the wildlife is on there, because I know that there is adders on there at the end of the day and slow worms, so that has got to be put into place. I'll reflect back to what the gentleman turned around and says, and I'm all in favour of what he's saying at the end of the day, because I was told that when an application goes through, that is put on notices on the lampposts down there. Nothing has been put down there, so it doesn't give the people much time, because they didn't know this was coming up tonight. Half of them didn't, okay, at the end of the day. Now, I've had phone call after phone call all the week to me at the end of the day. My phone's been ringing all day long regarding this application, right? So, you know, I'm here to represent the people, and I think this ought to be either refused, because, you know, in the past, I mean, go back steep in history on this at the end of the day. It goes back a long way, goes back to into the 1900s here, regarding what was going to be put on there at the end of the day. It was supposed to have been put on there, an application went in for recreational, tennis, right? You say it was a putting green, then it was going to be a pet cemetery. They were all refused, right? I would like to leave that as open space, because at the end of the day, I think by building on there, you're going to come up a hell of a lot of bloody problems, and I'll tell you that now. A hell of a lot of problems. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Suzanne, wish to add anything? Or? Oh, yes. Yes. Councillor Aber, we've got some numbers for you, you asked for.
So in terms of the numbers of objections received, I haven't got information of where they were from, but there was a petition with 49 signatures on, and 30 further letters of objection were received, and that's outlined in... It's outlined in the committee report.
In the outlined committee report?
It's in the committee report.
Right. Councillors, we don't have the applicant, agent or representative, so it's open to you. I've already got two names, starting with Councillor Alexander and then Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. The 1934 covenant that was placed on that land, which was actually finished, I believe, in 1935, I have no idea why, gave that the status of recreational land. Numerous applications came through for that, and one of them being a tennis court with a 10-metre high fence around it. You can see why that failed at planning stage. And the other was a pet cemetery. This has been dogged throughout its career, this parcel of land. By the very name of the place in which it lives, Garden Road, indicates that it is designed and specifically meant to be a garden area for the people. So the covenant carries that, which is, we have been told this evening, is still in existence, and I didn't realise that the covenant had not been lifted or in fact been taken off. Okay, fine, That's acceptable. So why are we going for an approval on something we know has got a covenant saying you can't do that on it? Absolutely. That's one thing that's concerning me. On the other side, the only way you're going to deal with Jaywick is through a full regeneration programme. You've got to do that. And 10 houses are being built, and I believe complaints have come through that these design are not in keeping with the rest of the area. Of course they're not, because that's what redevelopment's all about. It's about change. It's about bringing something new to replace something which is substandard, and some of the properties are of a substandard nature. This is a very difficult situation we find ourselves in, but I would like more clarification on the covenant and exactly what legal status it holds. Does it still hold the status where we can't build on it because of that very reason? And I think I'd like that as an answer, Chair, if I may.
Right. Suzanne, have you got an answer on whether the covenant does hold still?
Hello. I'm going to deal with the covenant question because we've actually done some research on this over the last few days, Suzanne and I, together, because it was something that came up as from a third party raised it with us. So putting the covenant issue to one side in terms of the termination of covenant, the agreement that's being referred to is an agreement, as you said, was 1934 under an old planning act. So it was a planning agreement at that time about the development of the area. So what it does is designate the land as open space, which is what Suzanne has obviously addressed in her report. So that land is protected as open space. It's been continued through various allocations in the local plan, and that's obviously set out in Suzanne's report. So what you need to think about is whether there is enough information or evidence for you to decide to go against those plan allocation policies, because they're the key things that planning agreement sets out. So that it's clear that Suzanne has said in her report that it is open space. There's no dispute over the fact it's allocated as open space, so you have to take that as read and consider whether what's been proposed is appropriate on something that's currently designated open space.
Yeah, come back. You're with the original question.
This is to you, Charlotte, if I may. I'm just sort of plucking a scenario out of the air here. If we went ahead and approved this, could a gallant band of residents get together and incite this 1934/35 covenant? Could that be enacted? Could they basically come against us?
I'm not going to give legal advice in open session about this particular matter for obvious reasons. But, as ever, the decisions of the Planning Committee can be judicially reviewed. So, ordinarily, you've obviously got an appeal situation, but equally, you've got a judicial review if it was thought that the decision of the Planning Committee was unreasonable on the basis of the existence of that planning agreement. So there is an option for judicial review, and that would, as you say, be third parties that would be interested in the application, not the applicant itself if it was refused. So judicial review is an option for looking at the enforceability of that planning agreement if it was thought that the decision was contrary to different policies and unreasonable.
I'm going to have to sit and think about that for a second.
Right, well, I've got two speakers. Councillor Holmes first.
Well, Jaywick's going for a few years. My missus first moved down here and actually lived in one of them bungalows. I thought the idea of rejigging Jaywick was to get rid of houses, to make them less but bigger and regenerate the system. If you can't do it that way, at least the other way is to regenerate those that are already there. Building 10 brand new ones is not going to solve a problem. It's actually adding to it because you're taking away part of the greenery. There isn't hardly any greenery down there, and what there is being built up by the council and built on. And just because it's a safe house, it's 3 stories high, which again, in my mind, these people living on either side of them,
They've got balconies in as well. I mean, they're going to sit outside with a glass of wine, looking straight into the front room of the people over there, or out their bedroom window, looking straight into the bedroom of the ones at the back. I mean, it's stupid to put a green land that's... I mean, there's that and a bit along, just across the other side of the road. That's the only greenery there, apart from the golf course, which is on the back of Golf Green Road. Everything else, if you look at that big... There was a picture there, wasn't there, which showed Jaywick. That's it. Look at it. Look, you can see the green, and you want to add buildings to that. It just seems ridiculous that you're adding buildings to something you want to regenerate. I can't understand that particular method. Thank you.
Yes. Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, John Holmes, I'm afraid you must have been reading my crib note, because that's it. You've said exactly what I was going to say. I was going to ask for that screen to be put up. I was going to talk about the lack of green space in Jaywick Sands. You know, you've got the beach, but nobody, not everybody wants to go on the beach all the time. You need some green space. That's called Garden Road. It was designated as a garden, and it should stay as a garden. We should be looking at redevelopment of brownfield sites rather than taking over the little bit of greenery there is. Thank you. And I would like to propose that we. I would like to propose that we refuse this. Sorry.
I'll take that in. I've got a refusal.
And I'll second. Hold on. I want to say something. Yes. Well, there you go. Having read the officer's report in depth and listened to what has been said, I think Mr. Garrett put it quite well, actually. Redevelopment. Well, it's not redevelopment. It is development, isn't it? Because we're not actually... How can you redevelop a bit of grass unless you make it better grass, I suppose? So, I mean, yes, Jaywick needs some help to be regenerated. I know in paragraph 6.42, page 105, that third line down, the committee needs to consider what alternative means of regenerating the area might be available. No, we don't. We need to just look at this application with all the information and say, one, does it comply with policy? Are we in agreement that it is and approve it? Or is it against policy, and what are the grounds that we may refuse on? Councillor Benison's already suggested that we refuse it, and Councillor Holmes has seconded that. I was just about to do the same and do it on the grounds that the appearance of the development, the impact on neighbours, it's an open space, because they don't outweigh the benefits. We've just heard, Mr. Garrett's actually done some research and told me how many houses there are for sale in the area, which is astonishing. So why do we need 10 more houses? I don't think we do, and not particularly in that place. So I would quite happily support refusal. Thank you. Councillor Everett.
Councillor Everett.
Unfortunately, everything has just been said that I wanted to say as well. I think the fact that this is designated green space, for me, is quite simple. Green space is needed in this development. However much we want to try and redevelop Jaywick, you still need to have some green space. So absolutely, I support your view that we should refuse.
Because we're going against the officer's view, or may not be their view, I'll start again, the recommended document. So we're summing those up. They will be lack of green space, or we don't want to destroy any limited green space.
Doesn't help regeneration. I don't think so.
No. Any further items?
Community about surrounding occupiers, overlooking, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. As I suggested, Chairman, it was actually in the report somewhere that they would be grounds for refusal if we were minded to refuse, I think. So the appearance of the development, the impact on the neighbours, loss of green space, none of that outweighs the benefits. And anything else? Lack of 106?
Yeah.
And lack of 106.
Yep. Right. Yep. We're happy then of those items, in which case put it to the vote then. Those that want refusal, please show. And I shall add to that one to make one more. And those against? 2 abstentions, right. So it is refused. No. Push on. The next one is planning application 19-00-235 full. It's the Rush Green Bowl, it's called, in other words, the football ground as we know it. Rush Green Road, Clacton. And this is basically the lighting, but yes, Alison gets this one, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this is before members because Tenure District Council own the site, so it's for replacement floodlights, 8 floodlights that are 15 metres high as per the existing, and a 1.2 metre high spectator rail. So this is the site, and you can see the existing floodlights there. So they're basically a like-for-like replacement. That's the spectator rail. You see from the report that the neighbour consults don't expire till the 18th of April, so we're recommending approval subject to that period expiring, so from the 19th of April onwards. Thank you.
That's not how it is now, is it? That's going to affect it.
Yeah. It's a single bar we saw this morning, and they're going to fill in underneath, presumably. So, yes. Right. I've got no speakers whatsoever on this, and even the applicant or agent doesn't wish to speak. I understand. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chairman. I feel rather embarrassed after all these years of that being now, me moving past it off to the allotment. I never knew it was called the Bowl. It shows you what interest I have in football, sadly. But looking at this today and being introduced to the field and the pitch, or I should say, and what is planned and all the future for this, I have to say I'm really very impressed by this, and quite frankly I think this needs to be encouraged because it brings a lot of people together, and it's all sourced locally. This is what I like. All the players are all from the same sort of area, from Jaywick round, and I think if it's okay with yourselves, I think I would like to move approval on this when the time comes.
Before we have any speakers, I've got Councillor McWilliams, and then I've got Councillor Guglielmi.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I agree with everything that my colleague has said over there, and from a health and well-being perspective, I think it is vitally important, especially down in that area. So I therefore am happy to second your proposal. Thank you. Oh, did he? I didn't realise he had. I'm sorry. I'm going deaf, I reckon. I apologise.
Councillor Guglielmi.
Yeah, I would also like to support it because of our youth today, the problems we're having with youth today, with the stabbing, this is keeping them off the streets, it is doing what we need for them. They need to do their activities, so I support this wholeheartedly.
Good. I have to say that I too would support it, and just hope that the new lights will be down on the pitch, because even as recently I have seen these lights from St Joseph, because they're wide glare at the present moment. The new ones will be down onto the pitch. There we are, look at that. that's the answer. So, right, anybody wish to further to add? In which case, Councillor Alexander moved. Councillor Holmes was first in, was the seconder. Oh, he's given it to... Right. I think we'll say those in favour, and if we find it's unanimous, then it really matters. Right. That is agreed. And now the next item is this large one for a drop curve in North Road. And this again is because it's a council house, so it has to come to us.
Yes, so it's a council house and a council employee, so it's before members for both those reasons. It's for a drop curb to an existing property and the associated parking area. So it's to this property. You can see the immediate neighbours got a drop curb with parking area, and you'll see numerous examples in the area of the same. So there's no harm. Highways don't have any objections subject to the conditions in the report, so it's recommended for approval.
Right.
You've got Councillor Everett who's lined up first.
Well, as they got displaced the first time, I'll go Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. We did actually observe that quite closely, and we did, have to make a serious decision there, but I would like to propose that we actually go ahead and approve the application.
Right. Councillor Guglielmi.
I totally agree with you there. And it also would tidy up the front, because they're obviously using the front to park their car on anyway. So it should tidy up the front of that area as well. And any cars you can get off the road is a great thing.
It is a dangerous corner just on that thing.
Yeah,
but
it'll
get them out.
Anyway.
Yeah, it would, yes.
They're going across 2 or 3 frontage there, aren't
They
they?
are.
And they're parking on the verge. They're bringing the verge anyway, so yeah.
Right, Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I have a question to ask, which is how many of those properties along there are council properties? And if we're going to do it for one, shouldn't we do it for all? And try to tidy up the parking on the front? No, but how many of them are ours is the question, because there may well be others along there, because they're very similar housing for that stretch of North Road. And so, therefore, there is a question in my mind as to whether we should be thinking about the other properties along there as well.
So we're not. We're not the applicants. Tendering aren't the applicants. The occupier of the house has put the applicant in and has to get separate consent from us as owners of the property. So it's just an individual that's decided that they want this.
I did notice this morning that the 2 properties either side have already got drop curbs.
Yes, they have. And others further along have the same.
Probably haven't, but of course. Right, so we've got a proposer and a seconder. Those in favour, please show. Right, that is unanimous, that is approved. Now, because the next 2 items were actually covered at the very beginning, that is the end of the evening, the end of the agenda. So